5. Do have two very different design philosophies at work here, as is usually the case between Samsung and Apple. Samsung continues to bank on plastic with their flagship device, switching out the glossy plastic for a more soft touch-like material that has a perforated dimple design that, to be honest, we're still not too sure about when it comes to its looks. iPhone, on the other hand, delivers yet again with its build quality with the full metal unibody construction of the iPhone 6. Has curved sides, less of a rigid design when compared to its predecessor, which gives it a nice curved look all the way around, even on the sides and the edges and on the top and bottom. The iPhone 6 display is a lot bigger now, the overall size of which makes it a little bit more comparable to the Galaxy S5, but the S5 is still a bit taller, a little bit wider, and that's perfectly fine considering its comparatively larger display, but the iPhone 6 remains one of the thinnest devices available, especially at this size, where they're really pushing the boundaries on what is available for the different ports and buttons on the sides. The front face of both smartphones can be described the same way. There's a signature home button, integrated fingerprint scanners within those home buttons, but the Galaxy S5 home button is flanked by two capacitive keys. Gone are the days when the iPhone could easily be written off just because of its much smaller display. Apple has given it a much larger display this time around, but they still tried not to go too overboard, fitting it with a 1334 by 750 display that still has a pixel density of around 326 to be exact. The LCD display delivers, though, as you would expect, with some enhancements that allow for brighter colors, and the fantastic viewing angles are still a thing here. On the other hand, the 5.1-inch Super AMOLED display of the S5 comes with 1920 by 1080 resolution and 432 ppi, which has been heralded as one of the best smartphone displays ever. Everything we still like about Super AMOLED screens is found here, with deep blacks, a lot of contrast, and colors that truly pop. Now, the difference in the pixel density is somewhat noticeable at a very close look, but for the most part you should be able to have a pretty good experience no matter which of these two phones you're using. The iPhone 6 features the new in-house A8 1.4 GHz dual-core processor along with 1GB of RAM, but the Galaxy S5 packs 2.5 GHz in a quad-core Snapdragon 801 backed by 2GB of RAM. The Galaxy S5 does offer expandable storage on top of the built-in memory, but the iPhone 6 comes with 16, 64, or 128GB flavors, so if you really need more storage, then you're probably going to have to go with one of the larger and more expensive options. Apple finally introduced NFC here in the iPhone 6 to be used with Apple Pay, while that is something that Samsung devices have had for a while with its iteration of NFC. Now, the fingerprint scanners on both of these take on different types, where the Samsung one is a swipe down, the iPhone 6 uses a tapping motion or touch motion. Now, finally, the S5 also has the very useful advantage of having protection against dust and water with its IP67 certification, something that the iPhone 6 simply does not have. The iPhone 6 retains an 8-megapixel rear shooter, but with a new sensor and a f2.2 aperture lens, faster autofocus via focus pixels, and a software-based image stabilization. Video gets a boost as well, especially capturing 240 frames per second slow motion at 720p resolution. Now, the front-facing camera has also been given an f2.2 lens with a burst mode and HDR video capability. Now, the 16-megapixel ISOCELL rear shooter of the Galaxy S5 is definitely no slouch itself, using new technology from Samsung to be able to give fantastic color reproduction and very clear and crisp images. Now, what Samsung also does pack in are a ton of features inside of the app itself, and the more simplistic way of using the iPhone 6 application inside of its camera does give it a little bit of an advantage if you get overwhelmed by everything that Samsung's camera is able to do. And finally, when it comes to software, we look at iOS 8 in the iPhone 6, which is not an aesthetic overhaul the way iOS 7 was, but it still provides quite a few new features like widgets in the notification dropdown and a new health app that actually taps into the applications for health that you may otherwise have installed and puts all of that information into one place. One feature I did like a lot about it was the ability to put in your emergency contact and also vital information in case you end up in, say, the emergency room and you don't have all of your information on hand right away. Now, the Galaxy S5 runs Android 4.4 KitKat, the latest version of TouchWiz on top of it. The latest iteration is the smoothest and the sleekest yet, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's been toned down too much. Indeed, it does come with a lot of the same features that might overwhelm the general user, but that also includes things like the heart rate monitor, the My Magazine, and also the bunch of gesture controls that you may or may not be using. There really weren't any major UI changes when it comes to this version of Android in the Galaxy S5, so as always with the case of TouchWiz, you're either going to love it or hate it. Or maybe you'll love it and then you might find you're not really using everything so much later on. And so there you have it for this look at the Apple iPhone 6 versus the Samsung Galaxy S5. Apple is finally packing a bigger punch in its iPhones, and we will admit they are a little bit better competitors now when compared to Android flagships, but the differences are definitely something that you're going to have to figure out on your own as far as which one is better for you. So